Hace 70 años, yo iba al instituto, casi la tercera parte de lo que el país lleva existiendo. Y cuando iba al instituto, solo tenía dos cosas en la cabeza: chicas y coches. Y no se me daban bien las chicas, así que hablemos de coches. Ahora vamos a imaginar que cuando acabe esta charla, voy a dejar que cada uno de vosotros os llevéis el coche que queráis. Suena bien, ¿verdad? Elegid cualquier color y aparecerá en vuestra casa mañana, envuelto y con un lazo con vuestro nombre. Y pensaréis, ¿dónde está la trampa? Y la trampa está en que ese será el único coche que tendréis en toda vuestra vida. ¿Qué es lo que harás, sabiendo que es el único coche que vas a tener en toda tu vida? Amarás ese coche. Cuidarás de él como no te puedes imaginar. Lo que quiero decir es que, en realidad, no va a ser el único coche que vas a tener, pero sí que tienes un único cuerpo y una única mente. Y eso es todo lo que vas a tener en tu vida. Y puede sonar tremendista, pero ese cuerpo y mente te tienen que durar toda la vida. Lo importante es que seas capaz de decidir y definir en qué áreas eres capaz de tomar una decisión inteligente y qué otras áreas están por encima de tus capacidades para evaluarlas. No tienes que estar acertado en miles y miles de compañías, solo tienes que estar acertado en una o un par. Conocí a Bill Gates el 5 de julio de 1991. Llegábamos a Seattle y Bill me dijo, tienes que tener un ordenador. Y le contesté, ¿por qué? Y me dijo, bueno, puedes hacer el impuesto de la renta con él. Y le contesté, no tengo ingresos. Berkshire Hathaway no paga dividendos. Y me dijo, bueno, puedes hacer el seguimiento de tu cartera. Y le dije, en realidad solo tengo una acción. Y me dijo, los ordenadores lo van a cambiar todo. Y le pregunté, ¿va a cambiar el modo en que la gente come chicle? Y dijo, probablemente no. Y continué, ¿va a cambiar la marca de chicle que prefieren? Y le dije, bueno, pues yo seguiré tratando con los chicles y tú seguirás tratando con los ordenadores. No tengo por qué entender todas las clases de negocios. Hay miles de oportunidades ahí fuera y, por ejemplo, soy capaz de entender Bank of America. Soy capaz de entender solo un pequeño porcentaje, pero Ted Williams escribió un libro, The Science of Hitting. Él decía que lo más importante para batear es esperar al lanzamiento correcto. En las inversiones no hay límite de strikes. La gente lanza a Microsoft, General Motors. Yo no tengo que hacer eso, aunque nadie me vaya a echar por strikes. Así que puedo esperar y mirar miles de compañías todos los días. Y es un juego con una ventaja enorme. Y es un error terrible pensar que tienes que tener una opinión sobre cualquier cosa. Solo tienes que tener una opinión en algunas cosas. De hecho, le digo a los estudiantes que cuando acaben la universidad, escojan una tarjeta con 20 puntos y esas son todas las inversiones que tienen que realizar en toda tu vida. Se harán muy ricos porque estudiarán muy a fondo cada una de las inversiones. Y tampoco necesitas 20 decisiones acertadas para hacerte rico. 4 o 5 probablemente serán suficientes con algo de tiempo. Por lo tanto, no me preocupo demasiado de las cosas que no entiendo. Si tú entiendes sobre negocios nuevos y eres capaz de detectar esas cosas, si puedes detectar Amazon, por ejemplo, es un logro increíble lo que Jeff Bezos ha hecho, y me quito el sombrero. Es un impresionante hombre de negocios y una buena persona, pero ¿podría yo haber anticipado que él iba a tener éxito y que otros 10 no? No soy tan bueno como para anticipar eso, pero afortunadamente no necesito hacerlo. No necesito formarme una opinión acertada de Amazon. Pero sí me formé una opinión acertada de Bank of America y Coca-Cola. Me refiero a que Coca-Cola ha existido desde 1886. Hay 1,8 billones de porciones de onzas de productos de Coca-Cola que se venden todos los días. Solo un penique, si le sumas un penique extra a cada uno, eso suponen 18 millones de dólares al día. Y 18 millones de veces por 365 suponen 6.570 billones. Así que anualmente resultan 6.570 billones de dólares de un solo penique más. ¿Crees que Coca-Cola vale un penique más que, ya me entiendes, Joe's Cola? Yo creo que sí. Además, Coca-Cola tiene aproximadamente 127 años de historia. Y este es el tipo de decisiones que me gustan. Y puede que tú tengas un campo de competencia diferente del que yo tengo, y probablemente mucho más actualizado en términos de negocios. Y puedes hacerte rico si tan solo entiendes unos cuantos de ellos y su futuro. ¿1 millón? ¿2 millones? ¿3 millones? Parece que funciona. Quiero hablaros a los estudiantes sobre vuestro futuro cuando acabéis aquí, porque vais a aprender mucho sobre inversiones y aprenderéis suficiente para que os vaya bien. Todos tenéis el coeficiente intelectual para que os vaya bien. Y todos tenéis la iniciativa y la energía para triunfar, o no estaríais aquí. La mayoría tendrá éxito en lograr sus aspiraciones. Pero para triunfar se necesita más que intelecto y energía. Y me gustaría hablar un momento sobre eso. De hecho, había un hombre en Omaha que solía decir que hay que mirar 3 cosas a la hora de contratar a alguien: integridad, inteligencia y energía. Y decía que si la persona no tenía las 2 primeras, las 2 últimas le matarían, porque si no tienen integridad, querrás que sean tontos y vagos, y no los querrás listos y con energía. Y me gustaría hablar sobre la primera porque sé que tenéis las otras 2. Vamos a jugar a un juego para profundizar en esta cuestión. Supongo que todos vosotros habéis acabado los 2 años del máster y conocéis a vuestros compañeros. Imaginad por un momento que os doy la posibilidad de comprar el 10% de uno de vuestros compañeros para el resto de su vida. Y no vale escoger a uno con un padre rico. Tienes que elegir a alguien que se va a valer por sus propios méritos. Y os doy 1 hora para pensarlo. ¿A cuál de vuestros compañeros vais a elegir? ¿De quién queréis tener el 10% para el resto de vuestra vida? ¿Le vais a hacer un test de inteligencia y elegir al que tenga el coeficiente intelectual más alto? Lo dudo. ¿Vais a escoger al de mejores notas? Lo dudo. Ni siquiera vais a escoger al que tenga más energía o iniciativa, sino que vais a empezar a buscar según factores cualitativos, porque todos tenéis suficiente intelecto y energía. Y yo diría que si pensáis durante 1 hora por quién apostar, probablemente escogeréis al que se desenvuelve mejor. Uno que tenga cualidades de líder, alguien que vaya a conseguir que los demás desarrollen su actividad. Ese tipo de persona, generosa, honesta y que reconoce el mérito de los demás, incluso cuando se trata de sus propias ideas y todo ese tipo de cualidades. Y puedes escribir estas cualidades que admiras de esta persona, quien quiera que sea de la clase. Y además añadiría un incentivo. Aparte de comprar el 10% de alguien, también puedes ponerte un 10% en corto en alguien de la clase. Esto es más divertido, ¿verdad? Y pensarías, ¿de quién quiero ponerme corto? Una vez más, no elegirías a la persona con menor coeficiente intelectual. Empezarías pensando en aquella persona que te produce rechazo por la razón que sea y que tiene diversas cualidades independientemente de sus logros académicos, que hace que otras personas no quieran estar a su alrededor. Y me refiero a cualidades que nada tienen que ver con los logros académicos y con las que nadie quiere tener relación. ¿Y cuáles son esas cualidades? Bueno, pues hay unas cuantas. La persona que es egocéntrica, avariciosa, deshonesta, todas esas cualidades también las puedes enumerar en una página. Al mirar esas cualidades a la izquierda y derecha del papel hay una cosa interesante. No se trata de la habilidad de lanzar un balón 60 yardas, ni la capacidad de correr 100 metros en X segundos. No de ser el más guapo de la clase. Son todo cualidades que si realmente las quieres tener, las puedes tener. Son cualidades de comportamiento, temperamento, carácter, que son accesibles y que no están fuera del alcance de nadie. Y en cuanto a las cualidades negativas, no hay ninguna de ellas que estés obligado a tener. Si las tienes, te puedes deshacer de ellas. Y lo puedes hacer mucho más rápido a vuestra edad que a la mía, porque muchos comportamientos son hábitos. Dicen que las cadenas de los hábitos son muy débiles hasta que se hacen muy difíciles de romper. Y no hay ninguna duda. Veo a gente constantemente con conductas destructivas a mi edad o incluso 10 o 20 años más jóvenes y están atrapados en sus conductas. Hacen cosas que repelen a los demás y no tienen por qué ser así. Pero llega un momento en que ya no lo pueden remediar. Podéis elegir los hábitos que queráis y cualquier patrón de conducta que deseéis. Es solo una cuestión de cuáles elegís. Por ejemplo, si os gusta Ben Graham, Él, cuando era joven, miraba a su alrededor y se fijaba en la gente que admiraba y se decía a sí mismo, yo quiero ser admirado, así que, ¿por qué no comportarme como ellos? Y se dio cuenta de que no había nada que le impidiera comportarse como ellos. Y también hizo lo mismo para el caso contrario, es decir, eliminar esas conductas nocivas. Así que yo os recomendaría que escribáis esas cualidades y reflexionéis sobre ellas, convirtiéndolas en hábitos. Y entonces, vosotros seréis de quien queráis comprar el 10%. Y lo bonito del tema es que ya sois propietarios del 100%, no lo podéis cambiar. Así que os compensa ser esa persona que quieres ser.
So I would like to just tell you a couple of short stories, and we'll draw maybe a couple of lessons from them. I would like to tell you of two women that each sold a business to Berkshire Hathaway, to me actually, for many, many, many millions of dollars. Both of them started with $2,500. By a coincidence, it was the exact same amount. It was everything they had in the world. And one of them was a woman who landed in Seattle in 1917, couldn't speak a word of English, had a tag around her neck. The tag said, Fort Dodge, Iowa. The Red Cross got her to Fort Dodge, where she was reunited with her husband who had come to the country a couple of years earlier. And she lived in Fort Dodge for 2 years, and as she put it, she felt like a dummy. She couldn't pick up the language. She couldn't learn a word. And so she and her husband decided to move to Omaha. So they came to Omaha in 1919, and there she found a small colony of Russian Jews, so she started feeling more at home. And then as her oldest daughter went to school, she would come home, this daughter, Frances, and she would teach her mother the words she'd learned in school that day. And this woman, Rose Blumpkin, spent 20 years saving money, bringing first her siblings over, her mother and father, $50 at a time. She sold used clothing to do it. She had 4 children during this period. And by 1937, after 20 years, she'd saved $2,500. She went to Chicago and she bought what she could of furniture. Her dream had always been to open a furniture store. And this woman who had never gone to school one day in her life, with $2,500, but with the same spirit that the people in this room had about having a dream and working to accomplish that dream, she built a business which she sold to me in 1983 for $60 million approximately, and which did $1.5 billion worth of business last year. The 4th generation is working in that business. This woman, Rose Blumpkin, she worked for me until she was 103. And then then she retired and she died the next year, which is a lesson to all of Berkshire's managers that premature retirement, you can't tell what's going to happen. But Mrs. B, with her $2,500, one further fact about her, she could not read or write. And she went into a furniture business, and she didn't bring anything in unique in furniture, but she brought a determination to succeed. She knew she could outwork anyone else. She knew she cared about her customers. She worked at very low gross margins, but she built this incredible business. And I saw one other woman who did a similar thing with $2,500, and I paid her hundreds of millions of dollars for her business. So I decided to go to the source and get these people before, I don't want you guys coming around to me asking me hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd like to join in with you much earlier. So I've followed this group, and today I'd like to tell you about one other small business person. This person, I went to buy his business from him, and he turned me down, which was very wise. But this was a fellow who was born about 8 years before I was. He was born in 1922. He was we'll call him Jack, lived in the Midwest. He was a pretty good athlete, didn't like school much. And I'm going to tell you one thing early in the story. Maybe you can figure out who the guy was. The company he built hires more college graduates each year than any other company in the United States. And this fellow, who was destined for this but did not know it, Jack, went to college for a year and then dropped out. He really wasn't that interested in school. And the year he dropped out was 1941. And when the United States became under attack, he went down to the Army Air Force recruiting station, volunteered, and they turned him down because he had hay fever. So he went over to the Navy and again volunteered, and they took him. They put him on an aircraft carrier. He flew small fighter planes during World War II, got 2 distinguished flying crosses from the Navy, and then he came back to the Midwest. So now we've got a young guy. Probably by this time he would be 23 or 24 years old. And the interesting thing is, he got back to the Midwest, and he actually kind of went from one job to another for a short period of, or not such a short period of time. And he finally became a used car salesman at a Cadillac dealership in St. Louis, Missouri. And at age 35, having moved up in the organization, the sales organization, he said to his boss, could I go in the car leasing business with you? The boss said, well, if you'll cut your salary in half and you'll come up with, I think it was $25,000, which he borrowed, we can become partners in a car leasing company. So my friend Jack started at age 35 in the car leasing business. And he had 7 cars. It was pretty slow. In fact, one of the things he did was whenever the phone rang, he let it ring 3 or 4 times so people would think that he was very busy answering other phones. And of course, it was the only call he was going to get all day. So his first venture was okay, but it wasn't really going to go anyplace. And there's a lesson in this for all of us. At age 40, he decided, with 17 vehicles, 17 cars, he was going to go into competition in the rent-a-car business. So now he's taking on Hertz and Avis and National and people like that who have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars. And he's got 17 cars, and his cars aren't any different than theirs. I mean, he's buying them from General Motors or Ford or Chrysler. And he can't get the airport locations. Those companies have them all sold up. But he was determined that he would basically offer the customer, can't offer him a different car, but he can offer them friendlier service than they've ever seen. And so he started a company, and he died about a year and a half ago. But when he died, his rent-a-car company, starting with those 17 cars, was worth more than Hertz and Avis and all the rest of the rental cars put together. The man's name was Jack Taylor, and his son, Andy Taylor, is a good friend of mine, runs the business now. A grandchild is in the business. There'll probably be a 4th generation along the line. So this man, in the United States, he didn't invent artificial intelligence. You know, he didn't do anything that, just like Mrs. B selling furniture, I mean, that any one of us could have entered those businesses. But he lived by the by the creed, basically, of delighting his customers and working with people and establishing the relationship with them so that they in turn would want to delight the customers. He couldn't go out there and take care of every rental car possibility, but he learned how to project himself and his attitude toward his fellow man and his desire, to make a friend out of every customer. He managed to take very ordinary cars and turn them into this extraordinary business from virtually nothing. And it illustrates several points. One is, you don't necessarily get it right exactly right the first time. I mean, the car leasing business, basically you were competing on the cost of money to finance cars. And it's very hard to delight a customer when you just give them the car and tell them to send you a monthly check for 5 years and you'll be back at that time. So his talents were being wasted basically in that business. But at the age of 40, with all of that experience behind him, he found the golden key, and he took a very ordinary business and turned it into an absolutely extraordinary operation. And just like Mrs. B or Rose Blumpkin did with furniture. He didn't worry about whether the Federal Reserve was going to tighten or ease. He didn't worry about whether the stock market was up or down yesterday. He didn't worry about the things he couldn't change, but he did focus on the one thing he could change, and that was the customer's experience. He was smart enough to see that he would find that business. Henry Ford, as you may know, failed twice before he started the Ford Motor Company in 1903. I mean, the test isn't whether you get the greatest business idea in the world the first time out. The test is whether you keep learning as you go along what your strengths are and what you can do for your customers, what you can bring especially to the party. And to do that, you need the education that I know you've received through 10,000 small businesses, but you need a genuine desire day in, day out to delight the customer. I've never seen a business, and I've seen a lot of businesses, but I've never seen one that delights the customer that doesn't succeed. I mean, what you want is that customer the next day when they think, do I want to rent a car or do I want to buy some furniture? What goes through their mind? It's the place where they've had a great experience. I don't know what I paid for this tie. Actually, probably if somebody gave it to me, but for the purposes of this speech, I will say I have no idea. But or the shirt I'm wearing, or this, but I do know. I will remember how I was treated when I bought it. I mean, you long forget about the price, but you never forget whether you had a good experience or a poor experience with the purchase experience. And you'll have a hard time finding a person that's had a wonderful experience, a delighted experience in purchasing anything that isn't going to come back. And similarly, if the memory is of rudeness, indifference, whatever it may be, they're never going to come back. And as a small business owner, and as you grow, you have to not only be able to project that interest in people's well-being, in delighting them yourself, but you have to do it through other people. And you won't be able to do it through people who themselves do not feel they're being fairly treated, that their views aren't appropriately considered. So you really do have to learn to multiply yourself through other people. And I advise the young people to come to Omaha. We have a number of classes. The key is to certainly, in terms of your personal life, the most important decision you'll make is the spouse that most of you will likely have. And it's very important to surround yourself with people that are better than you are. You are going to move in the direction of the people you associate with. So you constantly. I've been enormously lucky in that respect. I mean, I've just had teachers and friends and a spouse that really was a better person than I was, and I had enough sense to learn from these people that life went better if you behave better yourself. It took a while. So I advise you to seek out, as your partner in business, your partner in life, whatever it may be, look for the people that actually are examples to you, rather than somebody that you think you need to straighten out yourself. And simple rules like that, delighting customers, working through other people, associating with people that will cause you to move in a better path than you might otherwise have, they will take you so far in life that it's hard to believe. I mean, they took Rose Blumpkin without being able to speak a word of English, and couldn't read or write, and they took her to what is now a $1.5 billion business. And incidentally, there's been no money put in it since the $2,500. That's been the total capital paid into the Nebraska Furniture Mart. And I think if you looked at Enterprise, I don't know their books the same way, but my guess is that very little equity capital has been added to Enterprise over the years. The business built on itself. So I want to tell you, I admire this group enormously. When I met Dr. Mello's class on September 22nd, 8 years ago, I was thrilled. And I admire people that are doing what you have done. Working hard at your job at the same time, you took on an added really a lot of hard work to further your skills. 99% graduate. I mean, that's a mind-blowing statistic. And I'm looking at 2,200 people here who I admire. I'm cheering for you, and I can tell you the best is yet to come. Thank you. Stocks sell at silly prices from time to time. Most stocks at one time or another sell at very silly prices. And it doesn't take a high IQ to figure out that they're cheap, but it does take a temperament that's willing to step up and actually act. I tell people, if they're going in the investment business, if you got 160 IQ, sell 30 points to somebody else, because you won't need it. I mean, I figured out very early, you don't have to be that smart in this business, which is fortunate, but you do have to have the right temperament. And you have to be able to ignore what other people are saying and simply look at the facts and decide, is this stock which is selling at X worth 2X? And occasionally you'll find things like that, and when you don't find them, you don't do anything. Charlie Munger and I have been making stock decisions and business decisions one way or another together now for 55 years. We have never the macro doesn't enter into it, nor does political. We have not made decisions differently because one party or the other's in power. We have not made decisions based on whether we thought interest rates were going to go up or down, or what was going to happen with labor negotiations someplace. You don't want to give up what you know how to do because of opinions which you don't know whether are right or not, and which are going to be transitory in any event. So you really go out there every day and do whatever makes the most sense. So when we buy the auto dealerships last week, we don't factor in anything about the Fed, about the deadlock in politics, about what's going on around the world. Those are all important things, but they don't affect whether those dealerships, which we're buying to own 100 years, they don't affect whether they're going to make money in the year 2024 or 2034 or 2044. And the important thing is whether we get a good business with good management at a sensible price. What he did was he got me thinking not as a stock as something with a ticker symbol that wiggles around and that, that you look at charts on or anything. He taught me to think about it as part of a business. And that was vital. And he taught me not to really pay any attention to stock market fluctuations except when they were working in my favor, so that not to get elated because something had gone up or depressed because it went down. So if I knew the facts on something and it went down, I bought more of it, and because I looked at it as a business. If you buy a business, if you buy a farm, you go up and look, every couple of weeks to see how far the corn is up, and you worry too much about whether somebody says this is going to be a year of low prices because exports are being affected or anything like that. You buy a farm and you hold it for, I've got one farm that I bought in the 1980s and my son runs it, but I've been there once, I mean, it doesn't grow faster if I go and stare at it, I can't cheer for it, more effort or something like that. And I know there's going to be some years when prices are going to be good and some when the prices aren't going to be good. I know there's years when yields will be better than others, but I bought the farm. And it just doesn't, I don't care about economic predictions on it or anything of the sort. I do care that over the years it's well tended to in terms of rotating crops, and I hope yields get better, which they generally have. In fact, that farm 100 years ago would have probably produced 30 bushels, maybe 35 bushels of corn per acre, and now in a good year, it'd be 200. I mean, we've really made progress in this country. That's one reason commodity prices, if you go back a couple hundred years, they've moved so little, is because we've just gotten better and better at whether it's cotton or whether it's corn or soybeans or all kinds of things. And you and I have benefited from that. And
so Apple's kind of like a farm.
Well, it's a long-term investment, and if you own the best auto dealership in town, the best brand, and you had somebody good running it, you wouldn't drop by every day and say, how many people have come in today, or I think interest rates are going up a little, maybe it'll slow down our sales or anything. No, you buy it knowing there's 365 days a year, and you're going to own it for 20 years, so that's 7,300 days, and things are going to be different from day to day and year to year. You shouldn't buy it if the day-to-day stuff is important. How do I value the business that Berkshire acquires? Well, the first thing I have to decide when somebody calls me is valuing this business within my circle of competence. I don't know how to value Microsoft. I don't know how to value Oracle. I mean, if Larry Ellison calls me or Bill Gates calls me, and they don't, but if any of those, I don't know, or biotech or anything, I wouldn't know how to value it. I just, I'd wish them well and tell them, I think it's worth twice as much as they think it is, but I'm just not in the mood to buy today. I don't know, so it has to be within my circle of competence. My circle of competence is, businesses I can understand. And when I say understand, I don't mean understand how to use a computer or not use a computer in terms of a computer company. I mean understand what the economic characteristics of the business are and what the company's really going to look like in 5 or 10 or 20 years. Bill Gates will tell you that if he were investing, he would buy Berkshire rather than Microsoft because it's so much easier to understand what our businesses are going to look like, whereas he's in a business where you're going to really have to be doing things differently over time. So I know that Wrigley's is going to be the #1 chewing gum in the country. I know Snickers is going to be the #1 candy bar in the country 10 years from now. It's been the #1 candy bar for 40 years. You don't have to be very bright to understand that when people lay out 50 cents for something that they stick in their mouth, that they're not about to experiment. I mean, we try to look at businesses we can understand. Famous lesson about a margin of safety, that you don't drive a truck that weighs 9,900 pounds across a bridge that says limit 10,000 pounds, because you can't be that sure about it. If you see something like that, you go down a little further down the road and you find one that says limit 20,000 pounds, and that's the one you drive across. In terms of our wholly owned businesses, we're not going to sell no matter how much anybody offers us for. I mean, if somebody offers us 3 times what something is worth at See's Candy, the Buffalo News, Borsheim's, whatever it may be, we're not going to sell it. I may be wrong in having that approach. More and more, with certain stocks, we've got that approach. Now, if we were chronically short of funds and had all kinds of opportunities coming, we might have a somewhat different approach. But our inclination is not to sell things unless we get really discouraged perhaps with the management, or we think the economic characteristics of the business change in a big way. I mean, and that happens. So, but we're not going to sell simply because it looks too high, in all likelihood. I mean, you can't make that 100%. Intrinsic value is the number that if you were all-knowing about the future and could predict all the cash that a business would give you between now and Judgment Day, discounted at the proper discount rate, that number is what the intrinsic value of a business is. In other words, the only reason for making an investment and laying out money now is to get more money later on, right? That's what investing is all about. Now, when you look at a stock, when you look at a bond, assuming it's the United States government bond, it's very easy to tell how much you're going to get back. It says it right on the bond. It says when you get the interest payments, it says when you get the principal. So it's very easy to figure out the value of a bond. It can change tomorrow if interest rates change, but the cash flows are printed on the bond. The cash flows aren't printed on a stock certificate. That's the job of the analyst, is to print out, change that stock certificate, which represents an interest in the business, and change that into a bond and say, this is what I think it's going to pay out in the future. When we buy, some new machine for Shaw to make carpet, that's what we're thinking about, obviously, and you all learn that in business school. But it's the same thing for a big business. If you buy Coca-Cola today, the company is selling for about $110 to $15 billion in the market. The question is, if you had 110 or 15 billion, you wouldn't be listening to me, but I'd be listening to you incidentally. But the question is, would you lay it out today to get what the Coca-Cola company is going to deliver to you over the next 200 or 300 years? The discount rate doesn't make much difference as you get further out. And that is a question of how much cash they're going to give you. It isn't a question of, it isn't a question of how many analysts are going to recommend it, or what the volume in the stock is, or what the chart looks like, or anything. It's a question of how much cash it's going to give you. That's the only reason. It's true if you're buying a farm. It's true if you're buying an apartment house. Any financial asset, oil in the ground, you're laying out cash now to get more cash back later on. And the question is how much are you going to get, when are you going to get it, and how sure are you? And when I calculate intrinsic value of a business, when we buy businesses, and whether we're buying all of a business or a little piece of a business, I always think we're buying the whole business, because that's my approach to it. I look at it and say, what will come out of this business and when? And what you really like, of course, is them to be able to use the money they earn and earn higher returns on it as you go along. I mean, Berkshire has never distributed anything to its shareholders, but its ability to distribute goes up as the value of the businesses we own increases. We can compound it internally, but the real question is, Berkshire selling for, we'll say, 105 or so billion now. What can we distribute from that 100? If you're going to buy the whole company for 105 billion now, can we distribute enough cash to you soon enough to make it sensible at present interest rates to lay out that cash now? And that's what it gets down to. And if you can't answer that question, you can't buy the stock.
People ask me what they should take in business school, or even if they don't go to business school, what they need to know before getting in business. And I tell them, you have to understand accounting. It's the language. I mean, it's like being in a foreign country without knowing the language if you're in business and you don't understand accounting. So you want to get as comfortable with that as you are with the English language. It's made me a lot of money, because I listened to what Ray Dean had to say 53 or 4 years ago, and have been able to understand what I was seeing on pieces of paper, what that told me about businesses, and the limitations of what it told me about businesses. I mean, but that's the way we invest.
You can't keep always trying. For the average person who's maybe never bought a stock before, what's your advice about that? You can't constantly sit there and wait and say, oh, it's going to go higher, it's going to go higher.
We don't even think about that. What we think about is, how much is it selling for? How much do we think it's worth? When we bought it at 35 billion effectively, I felt the company was probably worth at least 100 billion.
How did it come to your attention? How do you find a stock like PetroChina?
I sit there in my office and I read an annual report, which fortunately was in English, and it described a very good company. And told about the oil reserves, told about the refining, told about the chemicals, everything else. And I sat there and read it, and I thought to myself, this company is worth about 100 billion. Now, I didn't look at the price first. I look at the business first and try and figure out what it's worth, because if I look at the price first, I'll get influenced by that. So I look at the company first. I try to value it, and then I look at the price, and if the price is way less than what I've just valued it at, I'm going to buy it.
Are you seeing signs of inflation beginning to increase?
We're seeing very substantial inflation. It's very interesting. I mean, we're raising prices. People are raising prices to us. It's being accepted.
You know, if we dropped $1 million of cash into every household in the United States today, everybody'd feel very good, except the people that invested in things that were denominated in dollars. And, you know,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you own a home, though, with a very large mortgage and you have incredible inflation, it wipes out the mortgage, and you've still got the home. I mean,
In Weimar, Germany, they gave you the mortgage back at the end. It was very interesting. That's the one thing they did right.
I will say this about gold. If you took all of the gold in the world, it would roughly make a cube 67 feet on a side. So if you took all the gold in the world, we could have a cube that went down there 67 feet, 67 feet high, and that would be the whole thing. Now, for that same cube of gold, it would be worth, at today's market prices, about $7 trillion. That's probably about a third of the value of all the stocks in the United States. So you could have a choice of owning a third of all the stocks in the United States, or you could have a choice of owning that little block of gold, which can't do anything but kind of shine there and make you feel like Midas or Croesus or something of the sort. Now, for $7 trillion, there are roughly 1 billion acres of farmland in the United States. They're valued at about $2.5 trillion. It's about half the continental United States is farmland. You could have all of the farmland in the United States. You could have about 7 Exxon Mobils, and you could have $1 trillion of walking around money. And if you offered me the choice of looking at some 67-foot cube of gold and looking at it all day, you know, maybe touching it, and fondling it occasionally, you know, and then saying, you know, do something for me, and it says, I don't do anything, I just stand here and look pretty. And the alternative to that was to have all the farmland in the country, everything, cotton, corn, soybeans, 7 Exxon Mobils, just think of that. Add $1 trillion of walking around money. You know, maybe call me crazy, but I'll take the farmland and the Exxon Mobils.
Unfortunately, most businesses will not come out well in real terms during inflation. Their earnings may go up a fair amount over time, but they're compelled to put more and more dollars into the business just to stay in the same place. And you know, the worst kind of a business is one that makes you put more money on the table all the time and doesn't give you greater earnings. And you know, the best investment of all, I mean, if you're the leading brain surgeon in town or the leading lawyer in town or the whatever it may be, you don't have to keep re-educating yourself to be that in current terms. You bought your expertise when you went to medical school or law school in old dollars, and you don't have to keep reinvesting. And you retain your earning power in current dollars.
I want to talk about the letter. Obviously, one of the things that you touch on the letter is when people should be buying stocks. We're going to dig into a lot of it, but when you're looking at the futures down about 818 points this morning, I think probably the first thing viewers want to hear from you are your thoughts on what's happening with the coronavirus, if this is a reason to panic, and if you are worried about this.
Well, I don't know I have any special thoughts beyond the news on the coronavirus. The very first day I bought stocks was March 12th, 1942. And the stocks were down about 2% that day, as it turned out. Unfortunately, I bought in the morning, so when I came home in the evening and my dad told me the execution price, it was down 2%. But if you're buying a business, and that's what stocks are, businesses. In fact, people will be better off if they say, I bought a business today, not a stock today, because that gives you a different perspective on it. Then presumably, if
you buy a farm, if you buy an apartment house, if you buy a business, you're going to own it for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And the real question is has the 10-year or 20-year outlook for American businesses changed in the last 24 hours or 48 hours? And you'll notice many of the businesses we own, partially own. American Express, we've owned it for 20 years. Coca-Cola, we've owned it for 40 years. Those are businesses. And you don't buy or sell your business based on today's headlines. And if it gives you a chance to buy something that you like and you can buy it even cheaper, then it's your good luck, basically.
Although there are a lot of people who look at the market and they say, look, I want to buy, but I don't want to buy when the market's sitting at new highs, when it's been hitting new records every day. Maybe it's off 800 points this morning, but maybe there's more of a decline to come because the effect of the coronavirus is going to be an impact on the global economy. IMF said that over the weekend. You are going to see weakness as not only China, but other countries try and address this. You're right, it may not change things over the 5 or 10-year span of things, but if I think that I can buy something for potentially 10% cheaper, maybe more than that if I wait a week or a month, maybe that's what I'm sitting around.
Well, if you think that, then you're going to get fabulously rich if you're right. All you have to do is just keep buying at 10-day intervals and keep taking your 10-day prediction. If I knew what the market was going to do, obviously, but you don't. I don't think anybody knows what the market's going to do. I think you do know whether you're making an intelligent purchase at a given price. Everybody, when they buy a stock, if you're going to buy, say, General Motors that has 1,400,000,000 shares out, you should be able to take a yellow pad like you have there, and on one page say, let's say it's selling for 30. It isn't selling that low, but that'd be 42 billion. You should say, I am buying the General Motors company for $42 billion because, and you should get it on a piece of paper. And then if you want to have a separate piece of paper, it says, I think I know what the stock market's going to do, so I know whether it'll be higher or lower in it. But you don't have that.
But if I worry that the economy is going to slow down, not just for the quarter, but for the year, that would impact how many cars I think they might be able to sell or even produce.
I'll guarantee you cars are going to slow down someday. In 1932, General Motors had 19,000 dealers. That's more than all the auto dealers in the United States today. There were only 125 million people then, but they had 19,000 dealers. They produced or sold, and there was 1 month, I think, when they sold less than 1/10 of a car, or right at 1/10 of a car per dealer. That was a terrific time to buy General Motors. and forget about the market. If you can predict the market, you don't need to read balance sheets. You don't need to read anything. You certainly can't predict the market by reading the daily newspaper. That is for sure. And you certainly can't predict the market by listening to me. But you're buying businesses. And if you had planned to buy a local service station yesterday and it was closing day, I don't think you'd tear your hair out or anything like that. You'd have already looked at where it was located and the contract that it had with the suppliers and made a decision on competition. People, because they can make decisions every second in stocks, whereas they can't with farms, they think an investment in stocks is different than an investment in a business or an investment in a farm or investment in an apartment house. But it isn't. If you get your money's worth in terms of future earning power over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, you're going to have made a good investment. And you can't pick them from day to day. If you can do that, you can, well, I haven't met anybody yet that knows how to do it.
You made a point of that in the letter this year where you highlighted a book that was written by Edgar Lawrence Smith back in 1924. And you said until he came along, nobody really realized the compound interest effect of buying stocks, not just buying businesses, but buying stocks themselves.
Edgar Lawrence Smith changed the world with that book, and the people have forgotten all about it now. Although in the 1920s, it became more and more gospel as the boom went on. But Edgar Lawrence Smith set out to write a book on bonds versus stocks. And he said he went in with the idea that bonds would be a better investment in times of deflation and stocks would be a better investment in times of inflation. And he said, if a stock yields 4% and a bond yields 4%, which was what he was talking about then, the stock was going to outperform the bonds because there were retained earnings that were building beyond that yield. And that had been true for a long, long time, but nobody paid any attention to it. We don't get rich on our dividends that we receive, although we're happy to receive them. We get rich on on the fact that the retained earnings are used to build new earning power, repurchase shares, which increases your ownership in the company. And Berkshire has retained earnings ever since we started. That's the only reason Berkshire's worth a lot more, as we retain earnings. My old boss Ben Graham told me very early on, you get more trouble with a good idea than a bad idea, because the good idea works. I mean, it's a good idea to buy a home, for example, and then people go crazy sometimes. The good idea works, and it works, and it works. Stocks work out better than bonds most of the time. And after a while, people forget that there were some other limiting conditions. With Edgar Lawrence Smith's book, it was that when bonds yield the same as stocks, which was the case then, that stocks are going to outperform because they have this retained earnings. So stocks started going up in the 20s, and all of a sudden they were selling at 5 or 6 times the prices as when he bought the book. And people, that's what happens in bull markets. People start out thinking stocks are cheap, and then they start thinking stocks have gone up. and a stock can be a good buy or a bad buy. A bond can be a good buy or a bad buy. It depends on price. People really have 3 basic alternatives: short-term cash, which is an option of doing something later on; long-term bonds, or long-term stocks. And stocks are cheaper than bonds.
Charlie said recently, Charlie Munger, the vice chairman at Berkshire Hathaway, had his daily journal meeting just a couple of weeks ago. And at that meeting, he said that there's a lot of wretched excess out there and that there's a lot of trouble coming as a result. Do you agree with that?
There's always trouble coming. Yeah, there was trouble coming in 1942 when I bought that first stock, all kinds of trouble. Philippines were going to fall pretty soon. There was all kinds of trouble in 1949. There was trouble, certainly trouble in 2008 when I wrote an article for the New York Times. I said trouble is coming, but I said buy stocks.
Would you repeat that this time? If trouble's coming, would you still say buy stocks right now?
I would say buy stocks if you get enough for your money. And, you know, we buy a few stocks, but we don't look at, we're not buying the stock market. We're saying, I am buying, let's say American Express. We own American Express. There's 815 million shares out, and sells it. This morning's 126 or something like that. So it's selling for roughly $100 billion. Now, the real question is whether the company's worth more or less than $100 billion. It isn't what the stock is going to do tomorrow or next week or next month.
You said just a few minutes ago when we asked you on Worldwide Exchange, right now Berkshire Hathaway is a net buyer of stocks. You are in a net buying position?
We've been a net buyer of stocks, or I've actually been a personal net buyer of stocks ever since I was 11, every year. There's been 15 American presidents in my lifetime, more than a third. I've lived under a third of the life. I didn't buy stocks under Hoover. I was only about 6 months old then. But there have been 7 Republicans after that and 7 Democrats. I bought stocks under every one of them. Now, I haven't bought stocks every day. There have been a few times I thought stocks were really quite high. And I've even written an article once or twice, but that's very seldom.
Mr. Buffett, how can I make $30 billion?
Start young. Charlie's always said that the big thing about it is we started building this little snowball on top of a very long hill. So we started at a very early age in rolling the snowball down. And of course, the snowball, the nature of compound interest is it behaves like a snowball of sticky snow. And the trick is to have a very long hill, which means either starting very young or living to be very old. I would do it exactly the same way if I were doing it in the investment world. I mean, if I were getting out of school today and I had $10,000 to invest, I'd start with the A's. I would start going right through companies, and I probably would focus on smaller companies because I would be working with smaller sums, and there's more chance that something is overlooked in that arena. And as Charlie has said earlier, it won't be like doing that in 1951 when you could leaf through and find all kinds of things that just leapt off the page at you. But that's the only way to do it. I mean, you have to buy businesses, or little pieces of businesses called stocks, and you have to buy them at attractive prices, and you have to buy them, and you have to buy into good businesses. And that advice will be the same 100 years from now in terms of investing. That's what it's all about. And you can't expect anybody else to do it for you. I mean, people will not tell you about wonderful little investments. It's not the way the investment business is set up. when I first visited Geico in January of 1951, I went back to Columbia, and that rest of that year, I subsequently went down to Blythe and Company, and actually to one other firm that was a leading, Geyer and Company, that was a leading analyst in insurance. And I thought I'd discovered this wonderful thing, and I'd see what these great investment houses that specialized in insurance stocks said, and they said I didn't know what I was talking about. It wasn't of any interest to them. You've got to follow your own. You've got to learn what you know and what you don't know, and within the arena of what you know, you have to pursue it very vigorously and act on it when you find it. And you can't look around for people to agree with you. You can't look around for people to even know what you're talking about. You have to think for yourself. And if you do, you'll find things.
Thanks to high energy prices, other factors, Russia's been one of the best performing markets recently. I was wondering what needs to happen in Russia for you to invest there, whether for Berkshire or for yourself, and what kind of companies would interest you there?
Yeah, it sounds like you may own a few Russian stocks yourself. I would, as you know, in 1998, Walter Wriston said sovereign governments don't default. In 1998, in Russia at least, he was proven wrong. And Charlie and I inherited a business at Solomon that was in the oil business, big time out in Siberia. And there came a time when we got to dig the holes. We sent the money in, and as long as we were drilling, we were welcome, and then we wanted to start taking the oil out. After our money had been used to drill the holes, they weren't quite as friendly. In fact, it was really kind of extreme what took place with us. So having had a few experiences like that, it might take us quite a while before we wanted to sink a lot of money into Russia. It may be different now, but I don't think it's any certainty. I had breakfast in Sun Valley 3 years ago, this July, I believe it was, with Kordakovsky, and we had a translator there, and he talked to me about whether he was thinking about listing Yukos on the New York Stock Exchange, but he said, it would require registering with the SEC or something, and he wasn't sure whether that would be too dangerous. Well, I don't think he listed there, but he went back to Russia, and he's been in jail now for just about ever since. And Yukos was put into bankruptcy with tax claims, and I just think it's a little hard to develop a lot of confidence that the world has changed permanently there in terms of its attitude toward capital, and particularly toward outside capital. Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the situation reminds me a little of polypetroleum, which years ago was much traded in Los Angeles. And the saying always was, if they ever do find any oil, that old man will steal it. And I'm afraid we have some of that problem in many of the countries in which we're seeking for oil.
Didn't we really have the livelihood of our guys threatened over there, Charlie? I think we sent in some people to get out the equipment, and they said if they sent in the people to get out the equipment, not only would the equipment not get out, but the people wouldn't get out. So we understood the situation. That was not that long ago.
One question. Are you concerned about the rising valuations on the NASDAQ market where companies trade at multiples of revenues instead of multiples of earnings?
The rising value of what did you say?
The NASDAQ market.
Oh.
Where they traded 10 times revenues or more, 30 times revenues instead of 10 times earnings.
Yeah. Well, we don't pay much attention to that because throughout the careers Charlie and I have had in investing, there have always been hundreds of cases or thousands of cases of things that are ridiculously priced. And phony stock promotions and the gullible being led into to believe in things that just can't come true. So that's always gone on. It always will go on, and it doesn't make any difference to us. I mean, we are not trying to predict markets. We never will try and predict markets. We're trying to find wonderful businesses, and the fact that a part of the market is kind of screwy, you know, that's unimportant to us. We tried a few times shorting some of those things in our innocence of youth, and it's very tough to make money shorting even the obvious frauds, and there are some obvious frauds. And it really is. It's not so tough to find the obvious frauds, and it's not tough to be right over 10 years. But it's very tough to make money being short them. Although we tried a few times way back. We don't look at indicia from stocks in general or from PEs or price sales ratios or what other things are doing. We really just focus on businesses. We don't care if there's a stock market. I mean, would we want to own Coca-Cola? The 8% we own of Coca-Cola, the 11% of Gillette. If they said we're just going to delist the stock and we're never going to, we'll open it again in 20 years. It's fine with us, And then if it goes down on the news, we'll buy more of it. So we care about what the business does.
You've often stated that value and growth are opposite sides of the same coin. Would you care to elaborate on that? And do you prefer a growth company that is selling cheap, or a value company with moderate or better growth prospects?
Well, actually, I think you may be misquoting me, but I really said that growth and value, they're indistinguishable. They're part of the same equation, or really growth is part of the value equation. So our position is that there is no such thing as growth stocks or value stocks, the way Wall Street generally portrays them as being contrasting asset classes. Growth usually is a positive for value, but only when it means that by adding capital now, you add more cash availability later on at a rate that's considerably higher than the current rate of interest. So we calculate into any business we buy what we expect to have happen in terms of the cash that's going to come out of it or the cash that's going to go into it. As I mentioned at Flight Safety, we're going to buy $200 million worth of simulators this year. Our depreciation will probably be in the area of $70 million or thereabouts. So we're putting $130 million above depreciation into that business. Now that can be good or bad. I mean, it's growth. There's no question about it. We'll have a lot more simulators at the end of the year. But whether that's good or bad depends on what we earn on that incremental $130 million over time. So if you tell me that you own a business that's going to grow to the sky, and isn't that wonderful? I don't know whether it's wonderful or not until I know what the economics are of that growth, how much you have to put in today and how much you will reap from putting that in today later on. And the classic case again is the airline business. The airline business has been a growth business ever since that Orville took off. But the growth has been the worst thing that happened to it. It's been great for the American public, but the growth has been a curse in the airline business because more and more capital has been put into the business at inadequate returns. Now, growth is wonderful at See's Candy because it requires relatively little incremental investment to sell more pounds of candy. So it's growth, and I've discussed this in some of the annual reports. Growth is part of the equation, but anybody that tells you ought to have your money in growth stocks or value stocks really does not understand investing. Other than that, they're terrific people. Charlie?
Well, I think it's fair to say that Berkshire, with a very limited headquarters staff, and that staff pretty old, we are especially partial to laying out large sums of money under circumstances where we won't have to be smart again. In other words, if we buy good businesses run by good people at reasonable prices, there's a good chance that you people will prosper us for many decades without more intelligence at headquarters. And you can say, in a sense, that's growth stock investing.
Yeah, if you'd asked Wall Street to classify Berkshire since 1965, year by year. Is this a growth business or a value business? A growth stock or value stock? You know, who knows what they would have said. But, you know, the real point is that we're trying to put out capital now to get more capital, or money. We're trying to put out cash now to get more cash back later on. And if you do that, the business grows, obviously, and you can call that value or you can call it growth, but they're not two different categories. And I just cringe when I hear people talk about now it's time to move from growth stocks to value stocks or something like that, because it just doesn't make any sense.